Assalamu alaikum. You're watching Changing Times and I am Dr. Zubair Khoury. This is a hot weather season, and hot weather season is also going on with the budget that is in the offing. It is expected that in the first week of June, the federal budget will be presented. That will be followed by the provincial government's budget by all the four provincial governments. But we are expecting some good things, some new avenues may be opening up, some reforms packages, and also concentration on growth. This year that has almost passed by, the expected growth was 5.1%, but the figures that have just come out, they are hovering around 4.5 to 4.7%. And the State Bank of Pakistan has also given its monetary policy, and the interest rate has been further reduced from 6% to 5.75%, and 25 basis points have been lowered. And we are also expecting some good things for the manufacturing sector, which has registered a slightly better growth of 4.5% this year, which was marginal last year's. But the farming side is still suffering. The farmers just recently, they were having some protests in Lahore's main roads, and they have been responding to already. But the farming sector or the agriculture sector, which has been a backbone of Pakistan's economy, may not be doing as good as was expected. There has been the power on energy crisis that has been lingering on, and this recent report has also come out, which has indicated that this power crisis will still continue until some more stringent measures are taken, not only in the production but also in the supply side. So what could be the expected things in the next budget? What was going to be the shortfall in the revenue projections, and what could be the projections for the next year? How the tax reforms can be maintained, and how the energy sector can be further boosted in the new budget. So this program is kind of a curtain raiser, a preview of the next budget that is going to come out in a few days' time. So let me introduce you to the guest I have. I have Dr. Waqar Ahmed. He is the Deputy Executive Director of STPI, economist. Doctor, welcome to the show. And we are also joined by Dr. Ismail Dawood Saab. He is working in the Rawalpindi Chamber of Commerce. He has been the past president as well, but still works with the different industrial sectors as well. So, Doctor, welcome to the show. Dr. Waqar, if I start with you, from the previous budget, and this is going to be, by the way, the fourth budget of this government, if you discount the first budget, because that was just in the beginning of the government, and so we can take this as the third consecutive budget. So it was promised by Ishaq Dar that after 2 to 3 years, we may be standing at the launching pad, and now then we will be ready to take off, if you may like this phrase. How do you see that? Is the takeoff stage that we have reached?
Thank you, Dr. Saab. I think when the government came in 2013, of course, there was a promise of a macroeconomic stabilization which they wanted to pursue. In plain and simple words, what that meant was that Pakistan had very low level of foreign exchange reserves, which were unable to sustain your parity of currency, basically, with other peer economies. We had to, of course, protect that. Second, of course, there were large losses in the system, primarily in the energy sector, of course, which was sort of curtailing the economic growth in particularly industry and agriculture sector. And then, of course, there was an issue of running the government affairs, whose size had grown to quite a bit. There were increased demands on the economy, particularly in the form of military operations that were supposed to be done. However, in order to sustain that, you needed tax revenues. So taxation was the third crisis at that point, that you didn't have enough resources of your own to sustain those kinds of military operations, and of course, law and order, civilian law and order in general. Now, that said and done, of course, the government was blessed in the later quarters of the same year through the lower commodity prices, particularly the oil prices, of course. And the IMF help also came in during the same time. They also lent you a hand to protect the value of your currency and support the balance of payments. Additionally, of course, the remittances kept on sustaining your economy until this date, of course, which have been around. In the later part of 2014, of course, and early part of 2015, you had the China-Pakistan relationship kick in. And in the form of CPEC, you had your positive indicators. You started receiving some good ratings by the international agencies, which restored the confidence of international investors in the economy, of course. Now, taking lead from this background to where we are standing today, of course, I think if we look at the productive sectors, you see that some demand has been created in industry.
Okay.
You see the demand for consumer durables pick up, the auto sales, cement sales, fertilizer, for example. All these sectors are showing positive growth. There is, of course, the same effect of this growth is, of course, on the services sector as well.
Yeah.
You see a boom in retail sector, wholesale sector, for example.
Banking sector.
Banking, that's right.
Cellular industry.
Construction, that's right. Real estate, so on. But I think within this all subsector, there is a key sector on which your exports are dependent, which is textile. And while textile is, of course, dependent upon your structural reforms of taxation and energy, textile is also dependent on your agriculture sector.
Yeah.
And somehow agriculture sector didn't do this well, not only this year, but last year as well.
But it's not due to the international market dynamics that the commodity prices are not picking up, and particularly the cotton prices have also gone down along with the rice and the sugar prices?
You're right, Dr. Sab. But this issue of low agriculture prices has been around for the past 3-4 years. The fact that your crop output declined this year, that also in double digits, Cotton was down. Now we are expecting that wheat in the next phase will also be down, That actually means that there are supply side issues on our side, that we are not being able to quantitatively achieve the growth in the agriculture sector.
I'll come back to agriculture in detail, but let me go to the industrial sector, and Dr. Shumail will be able to tell us more. How do you see this growth of 4.5%? We are expecting around this, although the survey has not yet come out. But last year's it was very, sometimes in some sectors it was minus, and other sectors was really marginal. Any positive signs here?
Well, so far the information coming out on the expansion of the industrial sector is definitely better than the previous year. So that's promising. But having said that, has that reflected in terms of our exports? Our exports are still on the lower side, and obviously the targets were set to about 35 billion, and still, we're about 16-17 billion at this stage. So not a much increase in that sense, and obviously unless we really increase our exports, our deficit is not going to reduce. But the good signs are that because of the gradual improvement in energy supply, specifically for the industrial sector, definitely things did improve this past year, and the government made sure that there would be no power outages as far as the industrial sectors are concerned in different parts of the country.
How are you faring this summer?
I think this summer it's been more relaxed, at least in the cities, and we've not heard any major issues around the country. So I think
it's sustainable.
It's more sustainable, and I think the government also made this claim that this time there are no unannounced outages. Despite that, obviously there are figures about still a big gap. So about 8 to 12 hours, depending on which city one is living in. But in the smaller cities or smaller towns, still there is. But in the past, like the 16 years.
I'm talking about the industrial sector. You may be.
Yeah, the industrial sector overall, the reports are that they are being at least given up till their working hours during the day, at least for the 2 shifts.
Okay.
They're getting undisturbed power. And that is definitely helping in definitely increasing their outputs.
If you could recall, 2 years back there were strikes in Faisalabad.
Definitely, I mean that time it was really bad. But things have improved. Obviously, there's more within the grid. There's more available power. But even then, right now Hydel and most of it obviously is oil based, and it's also now gases, since we've also imported more, and that is also helping. But within that, obviously, an additional factor that is going in the favor of the government was the reduced prices, as Dr. was mentioning. So all those factors are definitely easing out the independent power production.
Do you call this space that is available, this is the takeoff stage that we have reached, or still a long way to go?
I think we've just barely got stability.
Okay, finding our feet.
It's good. It's positive. Now with this macroeconomic stability, it can definitely strengthen or bolster our way forward. And now it would depend on the government to really come out with taking this as an opportunity to come out with an option where they focus on microeconomics, they focus on how to really build upon it, strategically. What's important and what I think we all really are lacking or we are unable to see is we want to see a wow in the budget, and what that means is that the priorities and the orientation.
Do you have the space to say wow?
No, but you see, that's the creativity, that's the innovation that is required. For
Okay,
example,
sorry,
Yeah.
you give your example.
yeah, for example, our focus is more on recurrent budget.
Yeah.
So 80% of our budget,
Yeah.
goes towards our recurring costs. How to reduce those? How to
And of
reduce
course,
the
income
waste?
generation.
Yeah, and
you have
then
more
how to
income
increase
space.
our revenues, how to increase, So we have to come out with more revenue streams. For that is where the innovation is required.
Okay, Dr. Waqar, in terms of income generation or the revenues, I think most of the expectations have been met, barring a few things, because the numbers may not be coming in by the end of June also. So the expectations are good. If you could recall, last year we had a similar kind of a program, and we saw that there was a lot of hue and cry on this filers and non-filer system, and then 0.6% tax that was imposed on them, and then that was reduced to 0.3%, and that the seesaw puzzle was going on between the traders and the government, and still it is being imposed, by the way. This stringent regime that was introduced for the non-filers, has that really helped?
I think, Dr. Sab, you cannot attribute this to just one measure by the FBR. There were, of course, several other measures as well. And the least, of course, favored was this one, which was the imposition of withholding tax on banking transaction of non-filers,
Did it help?
basically. If you look at the March figures, you had an additional 8,000 people who had become incremental filers.
Okay.
If you look, and this was despite
Incremental, what do you mean by
new,
incremental?
new.
Okay.
This is despite the amnesty scheme which the government had announced this year
Yeah.
for the non-filers,
Yeah.
basically. So if you look at this number, basically, it is still a very small number. But having said that, bringing the people into the documented economy is certainly a welcome step. However, you still do not have the complementary mechanisms to check that these non-filers who have now become filers are actually telling you the right kind of proceeds, For example, under coercion, I will file my return, but that doesn't mean that I have actually shown you all the kinds of transactions that I have performed.
Yeah.
So this year, a new phenomena that happened, and this is what our friends from the wholesale and retail sector tell us, that there's also been an increase in cash economy this year.
Yeah.
So people have come around and opened their own coffers, basically, to handle those multiple transactions, which they cannot handle through the banking system, basically. Now,
It's a dangerous sign. It's a dangerous sign that people are going for the cash economy.
This is, Dr. Sab. And while you are taking these measures on tax policy side, you are not supplementing these with tax administration reforms, basically. You can only stop people from an increasing informal sector or an increasing cash economy by improving the audit function of FBR.
Yeah.
By actually telling the people that if the law tells you that you're hiding some form of income from me, I can actually put you behind bars. That audit function isn't being strengthened.
You see, if you go on with this punitive measures, our economy, with people are already having not that much confidence in it. That's why there's so less number of filers. These punitive measures, do you think they are going to help? They are still further frighten the retailers and the people who are doing business in the cash?
Doctor, this is a very good question, and it's not just Pakistan which is currently battling with this issue. Governments in Turkey and South Africa and Brazil, these are the three economies that are currently going through a phase of increasing their tax to GDP ratio, basically. And the first thing that they did was not to focus on policy or administration, was to focus on culture.
Yeah.
The fact that the trust, the social contract between the payer and the payee is missing, they started focusing on an outreach campaign led by the government, of course, to change the way people perceive tax culture in the economy. They made role models of people who were actually paying taxes. They made examples of people, large evaders, for example. They made this distinction of tax evasion and tax avoidance. They made this distinction go away. This is the distinction that gave rise to Panama Gate at the first instance, basically. So you can't have separate rules for tax evasion and separate rules for tax avoidance. But that said and done, Dr. Saab, I think now talking in future, of course, what can the government do in this budget basically on tax reform, So there are three very simple steps, something that you're already under an IMF program and you're already under their promise, First is that stay the course and continue to remove the existing exemptions and concessions that are there in your tax system, most of these exemptions which you have given are of arbitrary nature.
Okay.
Several are obsolete, which were given by previous governments, Second, of course, is strengthen the administration system. Prior to 18th Amendment, a business person had one FBR to deal with. Now you have one FBR plus 3 provincial tax authorities to deal with. And there is a layer of multiplicity and duplicity going on basically.
And administrative cost also increases.
Administrative cost
to
to the
hire more
taxpayer.
accountants.
And this is what the cost of doing business indicators of World Bank tells you, that now on average you have 570 hours faced by Pakistani businessmen to settle down their tax issues.
This is a very important thing. Let me go to Dr. Shemail. The cost of doing business is increased due to X number of bureaucratic measures and this tax regime. Can they be simplified in terms of your own people? You may be talking amongst your own circles that this the regime of the pre-18th Amendment, only federal government you have to handle in most of the cases, but now there are provincial governments, and if you are doing business in 3 provinces, and most of you may be doing it because you are sending your products here and there. So how hard it has become?
It's become cumbersome, as Dr. Shah was saying. It's not only wasting time, but it's also causing harassment. Literally, the people in these departments who are in the organizations who should be taking care of financial planning or budgeting are actually focusing on just responding to notices.
Okay.
And right now there is such a chaos.
Or maybe finding creative ways to avoid them.
No, actually, the point is that right now, and it has been for many years, the tax administration's focus has always been that whoever is doing a good job, whoever is a good taxpayer, they are making sure that they are burdened more. And it is going on and on. We've been talking about this, at all the forums for so many years. But somehow, that is one area where if the government removes those hurdles, right now, the government thinks that if they want to increase the tax revenue, the only mechanism that comes to their mind is to increase punitive measures, make more penalties higher, and so forth and so on, and give more heavy-handedness. But that really didn't really help. Right? For example, I would like to say, in the previous 2 or 3 budgets, we see that the telecom sector, which is a good performer, is being punished for being a good performer. So similarly, other sectors are being punished for being good performers. So eventually, that's going to have an impact.
Yeah, they stagnate.
They're going to stagnate. They're going to pull out. If there's foreign, proceeds coming in, they will not bring in more foreign direct investment, and therefore, those people who are within the country are, flight of capital. You mentioned about Panama, but now there is Dubai Gate and so forth and so on. So, that is why should we let our proceeds go to other places? Why should they go to tax havens? Why don't we create a tax haven here for them? Why don't we bring them into the... So it's a very simple process. It makes complete sense to bring the tax to a smaller digits, have it a broad and a fairer tax, and bring everyone into the fold. Instead of creating tax amnesty, first having very high tax rates.
That's what Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif was talking earlier when he came in, that why should we have 17% and 25% taxes? Why not have 5% flat?
Recently, we are.
Everybody should be paying.
I think recently, maybe it's come to your information. We've been behind a new initiative. It's kind of radical, where we're thinking that the corporate tax should come to 20%, and the income tax for all individuals should come to 10%, and the import duties should come to 5%. The sales tax should be across the board 5%.
It'll be easier to do business. You don't have to.
That's
a nightmare for the accountants.
And the accountability measure techniques should be simplified. So these techniques can make the lives of people. They should focus on business. They should be. They should not even think about the tax, and that the perverse incentive to go outside the tax net should be removed, and people should say it is more, it's easier, it's cost effective to stay within the tax net.
Okay, Dr. This idea that has been going on and has been implemented by many countries, but there are there must be some opportunity cost to this because the government is not going for this side. It looks plain simple, and as they say that the simple thing is not always good. There is always a devil in the detail. So what could be the opportunity cost of this flatter system?
I think, Dr. We had a discussion on this with the FBR, and they tell us that they're always fearful of this, that what if things don't turn out as we are predicting. So basically what we are predicting is that we'll make the taxation structure flatter and there will be an increase in filers and as well as the revenue collected, What if it doesn't happen, Now, this indicates...
They're scared of taking a plunge. It's a big plunge?
Certainly they are. But what does this indicate, if you just step back a bit? This indicates your lack of trust
in the people,
in the people and certainly on your own administration. You believe that when we will lower the tax, the same administration will not be able to bring in the new taxes, which comes back to the same point, that what is it exactly that our tax authorities are doing? And we currently have a tax reform commission constituted by the Finance Committee, which has come up with its draft report. One of the things that this draft report points out is that most of the taxes which are being collected in Pakistan, least amount of effort goes from FBR. Mostly they're in the form of withholding taxes,
petroleum, yes,
which WAPDA can collect from you, which even your organization PTV collects from people, for example. There are withholding taxes which mobile companies collect for you, So the own tax effort of FBR has been declining over the years. So certainly the starting
They have
point,
a big machinery, isn't it?
Absolutely. In several districts, Octave, the tax collected was lesser than the cost of administrating that tax.
That's it.
There was a report about it last year as well. So the starting point, coming to your question, is the reform of FBR on functional lines. Turkey has done it.
So tell me about the reform. I have been listening about this phrase, the reform of tax system, for the last 40 years maybe.
Yes.
Every new government comes in and say that we are going to reform this whole tax regime, but nothing happens. There have been some international experts, there have been some reports, there have been some trainings abroad, there have been some new taxpayers units created, their office has been modernized, blah, 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 blah. Nothing on ground happens.
But Doctor, most of the time when we talk of reform of tax regime, even this government, for example, these were reforms focused on the policy side. It is only now that you are realizing that you have exhausted most of your options on the policy side. What is not happening is the reform of the civil service, sitting in your tax authorities, for example.
There has been, in the Shaukat Aziz era, there has been a civil service reform. They were sent to the MBA
Kennedy School of Government.
Yeah, Kennedy School of Government. They were asked to do MBA from the IBA.
Certainly.
There has been some modern taxpayers units. They were given good offices. They were given 25,000, 30,000 extra pay. Nothing happened.
Certainly. And you also did not go back to the drawing board to evaluate whether those same people were there. They were given a tenure and autonomy to exercise whatever they had learned. Now, my example that I want to put here in front of you is to look at the reforms which Sindh government has done. SRB at the moment, Sindh Revenue Board, is a key example of tax administrative reforms. They have corporatized the entire organization. Even today you can see the newspaper that there is a 3-digit growth in the revenue collected just from autos. Just from motor vehicle taxes, for example, transport-related taxes.
Through punitive measures or through simpler measures?
So through both, through policy, administration, as well as through an improved audit system at SRB. Now, the moment you enter into Sindh Revenue Board offices, for example, you realize that this is not a traditional government office. You don't have naib qasids and farash in that office, for example. Civil servants are making tea and coffee for themselves, standing up and taking their own photocopy.
The modern taxpayer units, they are doing the same thing. You must have been there.
Yes, but
they are big glassy offices and they're sitting there.
But Doctor, most of the time when I go to large taxpayer offices or even the taxpayer facilitation units, for example, their server is down. So when I sit with them to seek help with my filing, they end up giving me a manual return basically.
Let me go to Dr. Shumail. Dr. Shumail, what about this? We have talked about this revenue collection and the energy sector and all. What about this infrastructure development that appears to be the mainstay of this government? The motorways, the China-Pakistan economic corridor, the construction boom is there, and of course the energy sector is also one of the bigger sectors that we can put in as far as the infrastructure is concerned. this is going to continue. How good or bad it is that we are focusing on the infrastructure more than anything else?
So, well, the thing is that we have limited, since we don't have more revenue streams, so our fiscal space is limited, our debt is high, our debt servicing is high, our cost of our defense is high, so all these things, we're left with limited fiscal space. So when we go towards the development sector, one has to focus on those development areas which can increase your productivity and can actually increase your GDP. So right now we can say that yes, if we are going for infrastructure, so that is bringing construction, so it is making our factories produce more cement or other things that go into that, and it is also employing people. But if you look at the beneficiaries of the road infrastructure and so forth and so on, because it's mostly road infrastructure that is being, or transport. So that definitely helps, but its impact, it comes in a longer
time,
the cycle is longer. So one needs to think or try to come up with options where that would bring in earlier returns, and because we have limited space. So that is just an orientation. Now within that, one can say focus, for example, how can we increase right now one of our biggest resource is the expats, right? So how can we increase the complexity or their how can we really increase their you can say the level of the manpowers, so that right now, instead of having the labor or lower, we could have skilled labor going outside.
Labor.
So a lot of the funds that are now being spent on infrastructure are important, no doubt, within the energy, within the within the roads. But I think
you're talking about the human development sector.
Yeah, bringing more on the human development sector, bringing more into the human development arena would help eventually to increase our productivity.
Okay.
At the same time, the expats or the remittances would increase.
They will multiply.
Yeah, and it would be a shorter period. The cycle would be shorter.
Dr. Waqar, if you want to comment on this PSTP sector, different types of investments, and plus look at the education that we have situation. Around half of our population is illiterate. Look at the dropout ratio. Look at the problem that we are facing in the health sector, and the mother mortality rate is also high, one of the higher. Look at the health and sanitation things that we are facing, particularly in the smaller cities. In bigger cities that may be better, but if you look at the smaller towns and the villages, this is the part of the human development. Do you see any focus on this vis-a-vis the bigger projects?
I think, Dr. Saab, this is an interesting point in our discussion, where whatever reforms that we are discussing, which should lead to economic growth and job creation, should ultimately also improve your outcome indicators, such as the ones which you're pointing out. Your net enrollment ratio should increase, your infant mortality ratio should improve, Now, if you look at your PSTP portfolio, and you might have seen yesterday's report, for example, like the previous year, we have still not been able to sort of achieve the target of our disbursements which we are supposed to achieve.
Okay.
Provincial allocations have also not materialized. Provinces are now blaming the center for late releases, for example, and that is why they haven't been able to absorb their allocations. Now, what is happening is that there is a need to reform the planning system as a whole. Whatever we allocate, it shouldn't be politically motivated, number one. You need to have some scientific basis to do an appraisal, a cost-benefit analysis of what goes through, And then when you are very clear about it, that this is in the interest of society, it will be an efficient and effective public expenditure, you should safeguard the disbursements throughout the year. And this was the purpose of Fiscal Responsibility and Debt Limitation Act, if you remember. FRDA.
65% that we're saying?
That's right. And you had to protect the social sector spending because of the investment that you wanted to do on human resource development, basically. So a corollary to this is to strengthen the systems of monitoring and accountability under your PSTP. Currently, none of the planning and development departments or even the planning commission at the federal has the capacity to physically monitor each and every project.
Okay.
But the taxpayer money, they have
It's
given
going on.
you the money so that you should generate value for that money, basically.
So can't that be outsourced? They can maybe
Absolutely.
some private
So-
sector organizations
so
who can
that
just
is-
monitor those projects?
That is one idea on the table, that professional companies should be brought in which have expertise in appraisal, monitoring, evaluation, and then learning from that M&D so that next year the same issues in planning and approval of projects are not reported.
Okay. This also brings us to the often repeated the civil service reforms. Look at the administrative structure that we have that also include the civil servants, the income tax official, the custom officials, and the administrative machinery. They are who are doing the bulk of the revenue job in the districts and the tehsils or the talukas, and that also includes some other area that police also come in the law and order situation. We have always been talking about this, the civil service reform. This planning division have also done something, but that has been shelved. Are you privy of any of these things, or we still maintain that status quo that is going on?
Dr. Saab, this has been a bit of a disappointment during this government's tenure because it is this political party, incumbent party, which had actually mentioned this in their manifesto,
Yeah.
that they will reform the administrative service, and of course the other civil services. Now, what has happened at the moment is that you haven't touched these services. I don't know, due to an apprehension that it may sort of stall the system or there may be any other issues. Now, bottom line is that the 3 or 4 key laws that govern your civil service, the ESTA code, the rules of business, the financial code, for example, they're all outdated. These are laws from 1970s, early 1970s.
Yeah.
Unless you reform these laws, which was also recommended by the National Commission of Governance Reforms, NCGR, this civil service will not be standing on a solid foundation.
Okay.
Then once these laws are reformed, you come to the governing structure of these civil servants. You have to insulate recruitment, reward structure, accountability and tenure from political intervention. Now this is not very difficult. Countries have done it. We have examples from our neighbor China, for example. India at the state level is doing it at the moment.
Yeah.
For example, Bangladesh is doing it. So you need to insulate your civil service.
There was a political will on this initially, but that didn't go through. Dr. Shimal, you want to comment on this? There have been some talk about this reforms, at least in the key government sectors.
It's a
like the
difficult
administrative service or the-
difficult step, and
Why do we say it's a difficult step? I mean,
because
what heavens will
because
fall?
the government basically functions through the bureaucracy, and obviously there is.
And what worse can we go?
Sorry.
What worse can we go from this position?
I know, but
there is a grand disillusionment in the people.
You see, that's how we look at it, because we are looking at the outcome or the output. But maybe the individuals who are part of this system, they think at it from a different standpoint. Their priorities are not exactly the same as we
The
are.
people who are part of the system, or the beneficiaries of the system, why do they want to change?
Yeah, so yeah, exactly. So when we do actually an appraisal, when we really look at the performance and accountability, and we bring that, we do a detailed analysis, and we look at it on a realistic basis. Now, for example, another country I want to mention is Singapore. Singapore, they have made sure that their civil servant is paid higher in the similar, cadre if they were to go into the private sector. So they have.
There used to be the case in Pakistan also.
Yeah,
in the
so
70s and 80s.
But what they've done is that they probably have the right number of people for the job. So one, if you have overemployed, you have a heavy machinery which is not accountable, and they cannot be fired, and the performance is also not merit based. It's all political motivated. Then obviously your results and your outcome are never going to be good, and that is why we keep on going around, and we never really come out of that vicious circle that we're stuck in.
Okay, so apart from the civil service reforms that we are talking about, the federal levels, after the 18 amendments, perhaps we do not comprehend or appreciate the changes that has been brought about. They are not having the capacity in many ways. They have not been trained, the civil servants working at the provincial level, at the district levels. So do you think the similar kind of a reform is also needed, or you need a certain kind of a different cadre at each step?
Well, I'm not an expert on this, but as much as I understand from the experiences that we go through, the civil service at the federal level and the provincial level is intertwined. So I think the whole thing needs to be really redone. Now, how would that really go through would depend on a detailed analysis that would be done in a stepwise fashion. First the federal or the provincial or simultaneously.
Whether
But
we want a
needs to-
reform or not.
No, it's needed. It's needed. We can put it. We can keep on delaying it, but it's needed. It's required for
Dr.
sure.
Saab, your take on this? Do we really need it? The government, the reform period, as they were proclaiming for the first 3 years, is already over. If they are not going to introducing any reforms in this budget, then they are left with only 1.5 years, because the last year will be the election years, and nobody wants to go into the reform phase. If we are not expecting in this budget, we may not be expecting in the near future.
Dr. Saab, this is what I said, that it has been a disappointment. This subject has been very disappointing. We were expecting a bit more from the government on this subject. Somehow, all that we are discussing about the effectiveness of our budget, the expenditures under that budget, the only instrument to implement these expenditures is your civil service. For every project, Dr. Saab, you don't hire a specialized project director. You give the same joint secretary a 10,000 rupees additional allowance to look after a very specialized project. Such a project implementation will not deliver you the efficiency which you're expecting in case of your education, health, transport section projects.
And they are not experts in every field.
They're certainly not experts.
Things are getting more intricated.
Absolutely. So, Dr. Saab, I think that we need to go back to the drawing board. We need to see what are the key best practices in OECD reforms. I named 3 countries in case of civil service reform who are currently doing it. There's the Malaysian example, which People's Party government in their previous tenure wanted to adopt, for example. But you have to give it a plan of 5 to 10 years. Maggie Thatcher gave it 15 years. She raised a separate civil service which is called fast stream civil service. She didn't touch the permanent civil service, which was the structure. She raised a new one, which was a technocratic civil service. And after a certain point in time, both services converged. They were merged, basically. Now, Prime Minister Bhutto started this. President Ziaul Haq started a program of lateral entry, for example. I'm not saying we should go back to those examples. I'm just saying we should go back to the drawing board and see what works best for us.
Okay. So, thank you very much. We're running short of time, ladies and gentlemen. We may like to conclude on this point. Thank you very much, Dr. Waqar, and thank you very much, Dr. Shmail. We have some very high expectations from this government. We have some very good expectations from our tax machinery, but things need to be reformed, perhaps in the civil bureaucracy, in the tax collection regime, and the whole administrative structure. We are not saying, as Dr. Waqar was mentioning, we are not saying that there should be holistic changes, but at least there's some reform package that should be there. But on the whole, we are seeing some good results, some good yields that are coming from this government's fiscal policies, but we need from this the takeoff stage a big plunge towards forward, so that we can come out of this cycle of 4 to 5% into 6 to 7 or even more progress that we can achieve in the coming years. Your comments and suggestions are more than welcome at facebook.com/Dr. Zubair Ghori official, and my Twitter handle is Dr. Zubair Ghori. That's all from us tonight. Have a very good night. Allah Hafiz.